And welcome back into another episode of the Calling It How I See It Sports Pod. Blake Terrence here with you. Kyle Sullivan, Quentin James alongside me. So I want to start out actually by giving you guys a little channel update. We keep growing our socials. So I did just recently launch a TikTok, finally dip my toe into that pool of
Yay.
side of things. So that's blindbase95 or at Spill the BT is how you can find us there. You see a couple of draft reactions up there. There's also some live reaction stuff from the first night of the NFL draft on YouTube. Also, if you follow me on Twitter at BT Sportsman, I've started doing some Twitter spaces as well. And as we get some more guests on here that are active on there, you might see us record on Twitter spaces too. So keep following all the socials. We appreciate you supporting us. We're going to have some new exciting guests on in the next couple of weeks as well as we continue to try to grow this. So for tonight, we record this sitting here on the 27th. Sorry, one moment, folks. My phone was talking to me for some reason. So we're recording it here this on Sunday, the 27th. So a day removed from the NFL draft from day 3. Chiefs ended up taking 7 players, though not with most of the originally slotted picks they had as they traded up and traded down a little bit. So we'll recap all of that. I'll kind of run through the Chiefs draft picks for you, and then we'll kind of give an overall takeaway, talk about maybe our favorite and least favorite pick as of right now, of course, with little to no context, no professional context. And we'll kind of run through some of the other main storylines of the draft. We'll talk about how the quarterback situation got all wonky, specifically the Shador Sanders stuff. And we'll run through the big trade up the Jaguars made and what we think about the Travis Hunter thing and the whole concept of going both ways in football. It's, Shohei Ohtani just recently popularized it in baseball. Does it actually work in football? Do we think that's going to be an actual thing? So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to jump into some Royals as well. You can find that on our next pod episode where we'll talk a bit about the weekend we just saw. Today ended a 6-game losing streak, so they never made it above 500, but they made it back to 500 yesterday and then fell back under today. So we'll talk a little bit about that and whether we think we should have seen some of these struggles coming a bit more. So starting with the Chiefs and what they did in the NFL draft this year. So as you saw Marty and I live reacting to on YouTube and TikTok, Chiefs, of course, trade back one spot with the Eagles. So I don't know if that means that the Eagles have to send the Lombardi Trophy to Kansas City. So maybe we actually have three-peated now since we got to pick 32 again. Is that how that works? Anyway, they pick 164 at the time. So they bridge that gap they had for the 5th rounder. And then they grabbed Josh Simmons, a tackle out of Ohio State, who most people said probably would have been the first tackle off the board if he hadn't blown out his patellar tendon in week 6 of the regular season at Ohio State last year. It was actually against Oregon, where you saw a lot of other guys go in the first round. So then in the 2nd round at pick 63, they took a defensive tackle out of Tennessee, norman-lott, much more of a pass rush specialist, not much of an asset against the run so far. A guy who didn't play a whole lot in college, only averaged about 20 snaps a game or so. So very much a situational guy, but the Chiefs obviously see some projection there. And just a couple picks later at 66, they snagged another defensive lineman, this one an edge out of Louisville, Ashton Gillotte. That's what I'm going with for now until I hear otherwise. I don't know if maybe it's like GIF, you're supposed to use the hard G. Maybe it's gelato, or maybe I'm just a fat piece of shit and want some dessert. Then at the end of the 3rd round, well, actually more like the middle, because the Chiefs then made another trade, this one a trade up. They trade up from 95 to 85, and that's actually a bit of a pricey trade up. The equivalent return for moving up 10 spots in the 3rd round based off of the general draft charts that people use to value draft picks and draft slots would have been a 5th rounder. The Chiefs actually trade a 4th next year, and it's the Bears' 4th. It's the pick they got for trading Joe Thuney. Now, I don't think the Bears I think they'll be a better team this year, so I don't think it'll be at the very top of the 4th round, but it will almost certainly be higher than the Chiefs' 4th rounder. So probably because they didn't want to trade one of their picks this year, why they had to bump up the price a bit to move up 10 spots. And they grabbed Noel Williams, a cornerback out of Cal, who most people kind of think is the most pro-ready of the guys they took in the entire draft. Big physical corner who kind of specializes in man coverage and an excellent press corner, really good at being physical on the line. And he actually he did some special teams. He did some punt and kick returning for Cal as well. So could be some competition for Nico Remigio or Sky Moore at the at the return spots. Then in the fourth round, they grabbed Jalen Royals, the best Kansas City name you could possibly have. Now he's got to change it to Jalen Chiefs, though. I think that's how that works. They grabbed Jalen Royals, a wide receiver out of Utah State. Kind of an intriguing guy. Actually, just read a film review on him today. He's kind of a hybrid between the guys the Chiefs already have. Probably the most similar to Rashi Rice, but bigger than Worthy and Hollywood Brown. Not quite the physical strength and specimen that Rice is, but best assets are yards after the catch and his ball skills. His tracking the ball in the air. So that's very much a Rashi Rice vibes. And then in the fifth round, they grabbed Jeffrey Bossa, I'm assuming. It's not Bosa. He's not one of the Bosa brothers. A linebacker out of Oregon. Speak of the devil, there they come again. Oregon with a lot of players drafted this year. Seen him actually comped for Chiefs guys most to Drew Tranquil. So kind of a slightly smaller linebacker that's a little better in coverage probably than he is against the run. And then they originally had 3 seventh rounders, but they did some maneuvering around. I want to say they traded one of them to move up. Yeah, they did. They traded one of them to move up in the 5th. Then they packaged the other 2 to basically move back where their top pick was in the 7th. And grabbed Rashard Smith, a running back out of SMU, a converted wide receiver. He was actually only a running back for 1 year, his last year in college. So there's a recap of the 7 picks the Chiefs made. Let's talk about some overall takeaways. My first overall takeaway that I have is that this is very much a draft, I would say, for the future. Certainly, if you go by the guys that you expect to contribute most, earliest picks, Simmons, they're saying he could maybe be healthy for training camp, but I would assume they'd prefer not to do the Kingsley Suamataia thing all over again and, try to rely on a rookie to save him. So that's very much a future project. Best case scenario, he's able to unseat Jalen Moore or Jawan Taylor this year. But, the second round guys, both of them are kind of considered tools gambles, especially norman-lott. Guys that are probably going to take some time to round into form. And then the linebacker, I suppose, could be more or less pro-ready, depending on his instincts and everything. And who knows what the running back that just converted from wide receiver. So really only Noel Turner, about said Shamar Turner, that was a different, higher drafted guy. Really only Noel Turner, the guy that I think everybody agrees should be able to help the Chiefs right away, which may or may not even be needed, depending on how their other cornerbacks fare. So, what do you guys think? Do you guys feel like this was very much a draft for the future? I feel like this could be a draft that, like, in 3 years, we could give an A grade, but if you're reactionary and just grade it, like, middle of this year or even end of this year, you could give it a low grade or even, like, an incomplete. Because I feel like a lot of these guys are development / long-term plans. What about you?
I don't know about you, Clint, but I actually think Josh Simmons is a here and now pick. I don't know if you heard Andy Reid's comments, but they plan to have him ready and a full go for training camp. At least that's their hope. I expect him. I do think that pick is a little bit of a risk. Obviously, I think a lot of people had him projected to be a top 5 to 10 pick next year if he came back and showed that he was healthy. With that said, I think like where the Chiefs drafted, and where they're always drafting, it was almost a risk for them not to take him. So if something happened with him injury wise and he never worked out, this isn't like a scenario where I'll ever look back and say, man, what were the Chiefs doing swinging at this big injury risk? That kind of is rooted back in there's just not 32 good left tackles, and the Chiefs are just simply never drafting and even trade up territory to get one of those top guys. So
Hell, with
I think
left
that's it.
tackles, there's usually not 32 true first-round talents in a given
Yeah.
draft. There's just
So.
32 teams.
So clearly, yeah, I really do think that pick is a risk, but weirdly enough, I think it was a risk at that slot for the Chiefs not to take him. It's just you're not going to get that opportunity again. Um, Norman-Lott, from everything I've understood, is it's kind of an odd scenario because he, like you said, he didn't play much at the college level. But I would think if you're drafting a guy with such a niche skill set, that's someone you probably see get playing time right away. They probably see a similar role for him there. I know Wharton's kind of been in that pass rush specialist role in the past, and maybe a
They
sign
are
of
similar sizes, so it kind of
yeah.
fits. He's an undersized DT like Wharton.
And that one was interesting to me too because it's almost like when Chris Jones was first coming on the scene, there wasn't such a premium on interior pass rush, and now that's become such a premium position. It's interesting to see the Chiefs basically, move up to get a specialist or take a guy that early that is going to be virtually useless for you in the run game. So kind of interesting just how that's, you get interior pass rush specialist. And then the last pick that was really intriguing to me was Bossa for sure. Just because it kind of goes against the typical Spags linebackers. Reading on his background, he actually came into college as a corner or as a safety, excuse me, as a safety. All the Power Five schools were interested in him, and they basically, I think he got to campus at Oregon, and they said, "You're a linebacker size." Not very often that the Chiefs, have these kind of new age linebackers. There's just not very many of them. But Willie Gay may be the closest thing to it, but truly kind of a coverage first linebacker. Not something I think we've really seen in Spag system before.
Q, what you got?
Yeah, to me, I think this was the quintessential Brett Veach draft. Typically, he doesn't go into it and make a lot of flashy moves. He goes about it in a more, needs-driven way. So I think the Josh Simmons pick, starting off with that, made the most sense. That's pretty much what everyone was projecting the Chiefs to do at that spot. I don't think he starts at left tackle to begin the year, but I think he could quickly supplant either of the tackles within a month or two. And it's going to put pressure on both of them to perform, knowing that he's kind of waiting in the wings.
Yeah. Not to, I know you got probably more to say on the other picks, but you both have said that you don't necessarily think it's so much futuristic with Simmons. And like you said, they did say that they want to get him healthy. They think they can get him healthy by training camp. Do you guys, you've used the word could whenever you're talking about this. So is that bonus? Is that house money if he unseats one of the tackles this year? Now, again, like if Jalen Moore, who is a wild card, of course, little to no professional tape on him still, even though he's a 4-year player, if Jalen Moore's a complete disaster, then they may be forced to play Josh Simmons there. Or if Jawan Taylor gets hurt and Moore is the one they feel more comfortable sliding over to the right side, they could be forced to do it. But unless something like that happens, I would consider anything Simmons that gives you this year that is not forced upon you as just house money, as bonus gravy on top, because you have had your already addressed the need in free agency. Now you're going for the upside and the long-term potential in the draft. Do you guys see it differently? Like, do you think it's actually a bit of a necessity that he contributes this year?
I kind of think they drafted him to be the starter. I think if he's not, it's probably a health concern. Like if he's not starting by week 5 or week 6, it's because you don't feel good about him being healthy. The way I kind of see this now is they almost signed basically a veteran backup, to be an emergency swing on either side. I think in their ideal case scenario, Simmons is your starter, and then you have Moore, swing into either side there in an emergency if one of those guys doesn't work out or you see an injury.
I agree with that. And I think training camp and the preseason is going to factor in heavily as well, just to see how he performs. It feels like they see him very much as hopefully the left tackle of the future. So if he shows that potential in the preseason, I think there's a good shot he wins that job to start the year.
Q, go ahead and if you had more to say on the other draft picks, go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, after that, we see another swing at the defensive line. I would say the lines have been kind of a weak point for Veach since he took over the job.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's interesting, second round to go with such a situational defensive lineman, but you needed somebody to replace Wharton there next to Chris Jones, and I think he could be a disruptor, but also more of a rotational guy. And then going back to back on D lineman, obviously we need another edge opposite Karlaftis. I think Gelati.
Yeah,
Gillot.
I have to hear him say it before
Right.
have any sort of
It's
confidence.
got to
But
be easier
what's
than
funny about
Suamataia, so once we hear
well,
it, we'll know it.
yeah, but they had him record pronouncers because that was so damn complicated.
Yeah.
That's why we were able to do it. I haven't found one for this guy. It's funny you
Well, and
mentioned
just a note
Karloff.
on Gelati, I think as opposed to Norman-Lott, who didn't have a lot of college experience,
He did, yeah.
Gelati did have a lot of production in
Yep,
college. So
yep,
I think if those two pan out, the Chiefs could be looking at having one of the best defensive lines in football,
yeah. And it's funny you mentioned
which is
Karloftis because
huge.
that's one of his comps actually, Gelati. I mean, that's a
Hmm.
guy because kind of like Karloftis, he wins specifically in the pass rush game. He's like Karloftis, he's big and physical, so he's good in the run game. But they're not, they're not they're not pass rushing technicians. You know what I mean? Like they don't have freakish athleticism to just slip the blocks. They don't have bend to twist themselves around the tackle and hit the quarterback from a different angle. They win in the pass rush through being relentless, through
Hmm.
collapsing the pocket.
Hmm.
So they're kind of similar in that regard.
What do you
Yeah.
guys think?
So
Go ahead, Quentin.
I'll go ahead, Kyle.
Oh, I was just going to ask. We're talking about all this potential for the defensive line, and I know that the defense has been a strength for a couple of years. I know one thing we haven't hit on is 5 of the 7 picks I'm looking at here are all on the defensive side of the ball. Did you guys at one point in the draft
Yeah.
ever think, like, man, the Achilles heel's kind of been the offense the last 2.5 years now, wishing
Yeah,
it went more heavy?
I was thinking about that before we hopped on. And the two, obviously offensive line is maybe the biggest need going into the draft. Little odd maybe that they didn't take another lineman somewhere, seeing as we only have two kind of, locked in starters at this point. And then taking a wide receiver in the fourth round, I think he's got good potential. I don't know that he's going to make a huge impact right off the bat, although he may need to, depending
I was
on
going to say if he does,
how
it'll be
some of the
because of
other receiver
injuries. And it's safe
situations
to assume
shake out
injuries with these guys.
and
Yeah.
possible suspensions
That too.
for
Yeah. For
Rice.
Rice. Yeah.
Like I was saying, I think overall this draft was about building depth. I mean, when you make it to the Super Bowl, as often as the Chiefs do, that's really what you're doing is building depth at the positions that you're weakest at. So I think that they were successful in. Obviously, it takes a couple years to really determine how successful a draft class was, but it is interesting that they kind of punted on skill position guys, taking a running back in the seventh round.
They certainly
Uh,
punted the can down the road on those guys, you could say.
yeah, yeah, which I don't hate at all. I
No,
think
no, yeah.
taking a running back before the fourth round at this point doesn't make sense for the Chiefs. And we got a guy converted wide receiver. He's got good hands, obviously. So I think that was something were missing last year was a back with good hands who could catch the ball out of the backfield. So if nothing else, he can slot in for that type of role. And then Royals, I do think is a bit of a developmental guy. He might take a year or two to really get ingratiated in the offense. But and then Bassa, last guy, I think that's a very solid pick. Linebacker is another area where we needed some depth behind the three main guys. So he'll have some time to develop, but could also contribute pretty immediately, I think.
You brought up the running back. That was actually going to be one of the things I was going to ask you guys next. It's like, how do you think they did in terms of gauging that? Because, a lot of people were pretty upset that they didn't take one on day 2, especially Norman-Lott, but even really both of those guys were kind of considered development projects. Neither one was, their day 2 picks were not tremendous value in terms of drafting guys that were supposed to go way before they actually did. Day 3, there was a ton of that. Almost all the guys they took were projected to be. Jalen Royals was projected as a second rounder by some draft experts and as a third by the others. Like nobody had him going as far as he did. And so, like, do we? We all agreed that running back was an area of issue, but like, I just feel like anytime you get the itch and you're just like, nah, take a running back early this time. Just think about Clyde Edwards-Helaire and then think about Isaiah Pacheco. And why I say that is because like the point really isn't to dump on Clyde or even say that like it can't work to do that. But I say look at Isaiah Pacheco because it's not that far off of he was actually drafted even more. He was drafted in the 20s, I believe. So he was drafted even later than Brashard Smith was. And obviously we've been happy with him. And then you factor in guys like Spencer Ware, Charkandrick West from the past, Darrell Williams. Damian Williams was technically a free agent, but he wasn't highly drafted. I mean, they've had so much success with running backs who they didn't have to spend premium resources on. That conversation has kind of been that horse has been tenderized in the past, but at the same time, like it seems to come up every year, especially when you actually need a running back. That it's like, well, no, we got to make sure we get a really good one.
Jet McKinnon might finally be so old that we can't bring him out off the slow cooker in January anymore.
Didn't even do that.
That was always, I know, I said that was a secret weapon. We need some more juice now that Pacheco's coming off
Well,
that
he's
end.
another example, though. I mean, he wasn't a high profile signing or a high draft pick. So, I mean, honestly, the list of that's maybe a niche topic for when we're looking for content in the summer, but we should do a comprehensive list of like the guys who took the most snaps at running back for each team last year and see where they were drafted, because I guarantee you the average aggregate draft slot that those guys were taken in would be lower than a lot of people would anticipate because like
I
I think they
honestly think
nailed the
you have
value
as good a
element.
chance of finding a stud in the fifth, sixth, seventh round as you do in the second, third, and fourth.
And it could be
So I
reactionary
think my
too.
philosophy is kind of if you're not getting a guy like Ashton Gianti or Derrick Henry or Saquon Barkley, then you might as well just wait until the later rounds to take a flyer on a guy. I mean, like you said with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, end of the first round, did not perform better than really any of the other running backs we've had over the past few years.
I was gonna say it could just be short-term reactionary. A lot of those, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, all these guys that signed relatively cheap, Saquon Barkley, and had huge impacts. This was supposed to be like the loaded running back class. It kind of made people look at that a little more. I think I said in air too that we drafted two offensive players, drafted three if you include Simmons. I was kind of thinking along
Right.
that skill position territory. And maybe that's, as like a Chiefs fan, the more fun thing. You're still always living in the past of the 2018 Chiefs, and that's what I want to see is like some high value picks use the draft skill position guys, which we just haven't done super frequently of late. I guess corner defensive side with McDuffie, that kind of thing. But yeah, it feels like we spent a
Yeah,
lot
that's why I
on
said like it.
developmental like
Mhm.
defensive players like Felix and Uzama hasn't panned out, and so now it's kind of like, oh, we'll throw Gelati at that. Keep trying to throw guys at that, but I guess as long as Spags is producing and giving good results, you kind of let him get away with what he wants to get away with, even if it's not as exciting as the 2018, 2019 days.
Yeah, yeah. I think, like I said, it's not as flashy a draft as maybe some people were hoping, but you got to have depth with those on the lines, in the defensive backfield, and in the linebacker core. So, I mean, I think part of his philosophy too is you have Patrick Mahomes, he can elevate everyone that you do have on offense. Might as well plug some of those other holes.
Y'all ever feel like we get jerked around as far as like, because my understanding, like just what I happened to read about him right after the Chiefs took him was that he was more like Felix, right? Like to Kyle's point there, that he's a bit more of an athletic speed rusher. But then, the more I keep reading about him, the more I see him comped to George Karlaftis in terms of being more of an effort motor guy who's not the most gifted athlete in the world, where that was supposed to be Felix's calling card was he had needed to develop a bit of strength and needed to develop a bit of awareness and even showed maybe not a lack of effort, but just like doesn't have the relentlessness. So on a play that doesn't go directly at him, he can get a little lost up in the wash there and get kind of washed out of the play. But his calling card was supposed to be speed and athleticism around the edge. I feel like we get a lot of that with draft picks. There's so many mixed reviews with how little we know about him. You get one guy saying, "Oh, this guy's a speed rusher," and then and I even said that on the Twitter space I recorded the other day. And then everything I've read over the last day or two is like, no, he's like George Karlaftis. So which one is it?
Yeah, well, I think the problem is we're as Chiefs fans, we're just complaining because we're drafting so far back. The guys that can really get to the quarterback and that are the surefire things that are having success in college, they're just simply not available where the Chiefs are drafting. I mean, Karlaftis ended up being a home run, I think, for where you draft him. You'd sign up for that 10 times out of 10
Oh
again. So
yeah.
it's not quite, I mean, the league's not quite as starved for pass rushers as they are some other positions like quarterback and left tackle, but there's such a premium on him that anytime a guy has like a no questions asked, an impact player, he's just going to be gone by the time the Chiefs are picking. And hopefully stays that way. I mean, the Chiefs are keep winning, keep producing results in the season. But I do, context around that, I guess, is we can complain about those picks, but that's just the reality of drafting where the Chiefs draft every year too.
Yeah. I'm not even really criticizing the pick. It's more just like I feel like we get, we get all over the place feedback in the
Yeah.
instantaneousness of the draft. So, all right, before we move on to some of the quarterback stuff and Travis Hunter stuff, it seems like either one of y'all have, like I said, favorite and least favorite. Either one of y'all have a favorite pick that's not Simmons? Seems like we're all on the same page there.
Probably Bossa for me, just because I'm interested to see how he gets used, and it's one of those got drafted late enough. There's a no harm, no foul if he doesn't fit into the system, but just to see a true athletic coverage linebacker, I think maybe he doesn't ever hit the field. Maybe it just doesn't fit the Spag system, but I was excited to see them kind of just take a different style player than I've seen in the past.
Go ahead and say Gelati, and I'm gonna figure out how to say his name after this episode ends. But whenever you can get a guy who has the production that he had 41 tackles for loss in his college career, 26 and a half sacks at a Power Five school. That's pretty incredible. Getting him in the third round feels like pretty good value in a draft that seemed to be weaker than your average draft. So I think it'll be really fun to pair him with Karlaftis and Chris Jones. I mean, having those three on the field at the same time is gonna, I think, wreak havoc on a lot of offensive lines that we face.
And I like that they kind of like with Simmons, where, we talked about how, like, sure, maybe the best case scenario is that he surpasses Jalen Moore, but they did, just like on the offensive line, if you want to, I've been watching The Pit, so I'm about to do a medical analogy here. They stabilized the patient with the basic stuff. They brought in Jalen Moore. They franchise tagged Trey Smith. They did everything they could to make sure they didn't have a glaring, obvious, just like black hole at the spot. But they also didn't delude themselves into thinking that that's the answer forever. So they tried to find a guy who could be. I think they did the same thing on the defensive line by, bringing back Amenahu and bringing in Jerry Tillery. I assume we'll see Mike Pennell back, but he doesn't seem to have a strong urge to seek out contracts elsewhere. So I think, like, I agree with everything you said about the lines just now and earlier, but I think we should give them a little credit there for, like, that's what they always say is the smart way to approach this, is like you fill immediate needs in free agency, you go for upside in the draft. Like, never ask a rookie to save your ass. I think they did a good job of, like, threading that needle there.
Yeah, good point on Pinnell as well. Topeka native, sneaky, just wants to play for the Chiefs for the rest of his life. I think why not? Hometown team,
I
keep
don't know if you
competing
can
for
call
Super
a guy who's
Bowls.
6'4", 340 pounds sneaky, but yeah. All right, least favorite picks. Obviously, to be clear, my favorite pick was Simmons. I mean, I don't disagree with anything you guys said, but the chance even of having a left tackle that could, I mean, there's a scenario. The absolute best case scenario long term is that, like, Mahomes retires with Josh Simmons as being the blindside protector for the second half of his career. I mean, that's the ceiling here.
We
So
can dream.
yeah. Least favorite pick for me, I do have to say it's probably Norman-Lott at 63. Now, we already talked about, like, he could be Tershawn Wharton, and if he is, great. Well, Wharton was an undrafted free agent. I'm not saying that, like, to your point, Kyle, like, I do agree there's probably been a bit more of an emphasis on trying to make sure you have some sort of pass rush juice from the interior, and Chris Jones might have been kind of the, what's the word I'm looking for, like the linchpin of that, the guy who got that ball rolling that made
Aaron
team
Donald was pretty
realize
good
how
at
big a
that too.
deal it was.
That guy's pretty good
Well,
too.
that's true.
Aaron
That's true.
Donald.
That's
We'll
true.
give them. We'll give them both. He's not human though, so I
They
don't
did
think
come in
anyone
the
thought they
league
could
like a year
replicate.
apart.
I don't think anyone looked at Aaron Donald and thought we can replicate that though. So
No, but so I don't know if it's realistic to say, well, the Chiefs didn't even have to draft him; they could have got him. That's probably not true. But nobody had there. Like, I looked at like 6 different draft boards just to make sure there was a consensus. Nobody had him as a top 100 player. Now, again, like, most people liked the Gelati pick. Most people had Turner slotted above, projected to draft higher than where he actually did. So they kind of made up for the value issue there. But I don't know that you needed to invest that much of a resource in, because, like, part of what made Tershawn Wharton such an appealing story and why we were always so excited by him and what he was his origin story. If he'd been a second round pick, I mean, he was good enough that we wouldn't have called it a bad pick, but we would have been like, I mean, I would hope he's a good situational pick. Like, you put a lot of pressure on a guy who most people don't seem to see the same way as you do when you do something like this. What do you guys think?
yeah, your draft status and what you get paid by a team, it definitely just follows you for the rest of your career. I'd agree with that same thing. I think that is the problem with Norman-Lott for most people. Is it's like they could see him probably having a role week 1, but it's just, do you like the value there? And so, kind of the same thing with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's actually, before his injury, a really solid player for the Chiefs. It just didn't meet that first round kind of draft grade or production for you.
Is that your least favorite pick then, Kyle?
I think so. I mean, I'm not like up in arms about it. Like I said, 'cause
Right,
I can
right.
see the role for it. I think a lot of other people pointed this out too, but it's just hard to picture too many like first down scenarios where you can get him and Chris Jones on the field at the same time, because
Yeah.
sometimes Chris Jones can be a non-active participant in the run game here and there. Not that it's a huge liability there, but definitely not something you want to just count on as option one as your run stopper.
Well, and there's a difference between being 6'6", 300 pounds, and just basically saying that's my contribution to the run, because it annoys people, but it can actually work. This guy's 6'1", 285 pounds about that. Like, he has no choice but to try to. I mean, if he's lackadaisical in the run, he's going to get blown out of the gap. So there is something to be said there. And I
Well,
mean,
he
you're
won't
right.
get the
Like,
he probably won't get the chance in the NFL to play against the run. Is kind of what I'm getting at. Like this, if he didn't in
see,
the
I don't know
SEC,
though. Did they draft a guy that highly to not expect him to grow? Like,
it goes
I
back to
honestly
that
would prefer
conversation
you.
of it's pass right. Felix Anudike-Uzomah. I don't think they drafted him thinking he'd be a base guy. At least not early in his career. He was kind of like a little bit of a pass rush specialist. It's just the premium, I think, on that skill set that you want.
Yeah. But I mean, you phrased it well there of like the upside, like the the absolute best case scenario that for Simmons is he's the left tackle for the rest of Mahomes' career. The absolute best case for Norman-Lott is he justifies his draft slot. So yeah, it's a big drop off there. Q, do you have a least favorite?
I mean, if I had to pick, it would probably be him. Again, I don't think there were any super weak picks in this draft or anything I hated. I might mention Noah Williams just because he seems a little bit redundant. When you're talking about having a big physical corner, feels like we already have a lot of those. I mean, you
Maybe
can
you
never
can
have too
flip
many
one.
corners. Maybe you could, maybe you could, maybe somebody can move to safety. I feel like safety is a lot less depth at the moment than corner does. So maybe you move someone there. But
He
with that
could be your
said, you can
pick.
never have enough DBs.
He could be your pick for the future too. There, Spags has a type, and you just cycle him in and out. Maybe this means Joshua Williams, doesn't have a future when it comes time for his second
Right.
contract. That's
Yeah.
probably
Him
like
and
Blake said,
Watson.
a pick for the a true pick could be a pick for the future where you hope you can replicate that production and get the rookie wage scale. Is probably what they're thinking.
Yeah, good point.
All right, let's transition to the rest of the draft a little bit. Let's talk a little about the quarterback situation. Cam Ward was the only non-surprising factor. Kyle, I know you're kind of a big fan of his story, how he went from being a kind of a wishbone quarterback, basically, which
Wayne T.
is not. There you go. It's essentially, which doesn't necessarily mean anything bad about him, but it means he was from a extreme run dominant system in high school. So, he barely had any recognition. I'm not sure he had any stars as a recruit coming out of high school even. And then, it even took him a bit to establish himself in college. He was not projected as a first rounder, let alone a top pick last year. That was the reason he returned to college. I think he transferred this past year, didn't he? He only spent 1 year.
Yeah, so Incarnate Ward, Washington State, and Miami. So truly kind of built it way up because he gets no offers because he didn't throw the ball enough in high school to even be on anyone's radar. And yeah, I never seen a consensus number one overall pick just have no buzz or attention on. Everyone I think was in agreement he made sense as the first overall pick, but like it's between Travis Hunter and Shador and everything else going on. Again, maybe I'm missing someone. I'm not a huge draft nerd, but I can't think of anyone who's been a consensus number one overall pick at premium position like quarterback where he's just a non-story, but seems to be he didn't grow up, I guess, in those elite QB circuits or anything like that. So maybe it's him popping up out of nowhere. But I think that's just kind of a fascinating story to me, and I guess that's his personality. He kind of prefers to be out of the limelight in that sense. But
Yeah, what do we think about the Sanders thing? I mean, I can't say I expected him to fall to the fifth round, but I don't know. Like, I
Neither
felt
did
like I
Cleveland, obviously.
had a feel for that this wasn't going to be as the common narrative was being sold, right? Because, like, just think about what we already knew. There's so many deep dives after the fact trying to, like, turn over a new stone of knowledge, which is fine, but let's just take into account what you already knew. He has a Caleb Williams sized ego with not even really that close to the same kind of athleticism or arm talent. And even if you like in terms of personality and you enjoy it, the Deion Sanders thing at Colorado, I mean, this was like people want to cite the Arch Manning pulling an Eli thing as the ultimate example of nepotism, but I mean, it was a whole other level. I mean, he in
Well,
college was basically, put on a coach slash father sanctioned fast track to be something that he was not. And so he was fed a bunch of narratives about himself that he then acted upon. So you could even make an argument that some of it should, that maybe it's not all his fault. But like, I feel like we should have probably been a little more realistic about what the whole package we were seeing was. Like, again, there were people who legitimately thought Caleb Williams could slide last year because of his antics, but ultimately most people agreed he wouldn't because the talent
that
was
was the
there.
product. Yeah, that was the product of it being being a couple other top QBs that people really liked too, which this draft didn't have as many. That was part
No,
of what
yeah,
made him a potential first rounder this year.
that's true.
I don't know about you guys, but I didn't read anything. Even the people who are kind of down on him, I think had him in that second to third round. I don't think
Yeah, yeah,
anyone
yeah.
something went on in those drafters because he does, ironically for being Deion Sanders' son, apparently kind of a limited athlete, but seems to be a relatively like high floor player. Like a smart quarterback, that
Right.
kind of thing, makes the right throws, and so probably one of those guys that he knows his role and that kind of thing, could be a starter for a while or at least a career backup, but.
Well, there you go. And see, I think that's the biggest criticism a lot of people had of him
Yeah.
is he's a great backup quarterback physically, but he has
Uh-huh.
a franchise quarterback size head. That
Yeah.
doesn't work. Like the whole point of like, I mean, I don't know the guy, but why do we think Chase Daniel stuck around even though he honestly didn't have NFL talent? It's because he had college production and everybody loved him. So, I mean,
Yep.
I'm
You're a
sorry, like
second. You're a
unless
second
something's
coach, and you know your role when you come in the game for those two or
right.
three games. Yeah. You don't try to be Joe Montana those few snaps you get in there.
Like Shador or Dion or whoever, like nobody's going to be okay with him being a backup. So like that's why it's such a hard discussion there. Q, what did you say? Do you think like because there are plenty of people out there who think that he was done dirty, that people got biased by, maybe there was some sort of Dion hate left over from people who didn't like him back in his playing days. They don't like how he cut. Like there are really some people who feel like Shador Sanders just got screwed over here, and I'm just like, I have a hard time being surprised at anything that happened. Again, I won't say I projected him to fall to day 3. That would just be inaccurate. But it never added up to a top draft pick, what I was seeing because again, I keep going back to Caleb Williams. He acts a lot like Caleb Williams, but he's not physically as talented. So that's like, it never added up to me that he would be a top pick.
Yeah, and, it's another example of the NFL media machine just going into overdrive about a guy, I think. And I think the narrative kind of spiraled into teams not wanting to be the one to take that risk. Even you can see that with the Browns literally taking a different quarterback before they picked him.
Yeah. A
It
guy who's
shows you what
under
they what
six
they think
foot,
about
by the
his
way,
future.
not to cut you off, but a guy who is Dylan Gabriel, the Oregon quarterback they took in the third, is 5'11", 200 pounds. Like I would make that dude. He's a better athlete than me, so nobody try to run with some crazy. Blake said crazy shit, but I am considerably larger than that man, and they took him to be an NFL quarterback, like above him. I don't.
I know we talked about this in the group chat, but I think the Browns going into the season have the potential for one of the most explosive quarterback rooms in league
Joe
history.
Flacco by week 12, man. I'm so excited. Just kidding.
I mean,
He's
the 45
What?
year old Joe Flacco, you have two rookie draft picks, and he who shall not be
Whatever
named
Deshaun Watson is going on.
being
Yeah.
paid $50 million to sit on the bench this year. It's gonna be very interesting. Um,
Explosive. I wondered where you were going with that.
Kenny
um,
Pickett's in there. I knew we were forgetting one. Kenny Pickett's in there now.
Hey, don't do small hand Kenny dirty like that, Q.
Super Bowl champion
yeah,
Kenny
yeah.
Pickett. Put some respect on the name.
Yeah.
Which of those guys do you think has the best shot of leading a playoff run this year?
Joe Flacco. I'm telling you, man, they're gonna fight it for as
You know what?
long as they can, but it's gonna be Joe
Honestly, if I
Flacco
were
by
to
like week 12 or 30. That's what we gotta figure the over under for the first Joe Flacco start. That's what we were at the conversation we need to
yeah.
have. They're gonna fight it. They're gonna avoid it, but they're gonna end up there.
Loki, if I was
I mean,
answering that
literally, who
question
who would who
seriously,
would you project as the opening day starter for the Browns right now? The
it would
guys that
be
they have.
I would say Flacco. I really would. I mean, Kenny Pickett is an under-tool, undersized. I mean, I'm making fun of him by calling him Small Hands Kenny, but like, it's generally considered the minimum threshold for quarterback hand size is 9 inches. Like Joe Burrow was like right on the threshold, and Kenny Pickett's at like 8 1/4. So I mean, he's undersized, and there's been some even stories that people are not the biggest fan of him. I mean, that could be
I think
why
he could be
Pittsburgh
developing.
initially gave up on him.
I think he
I
could be
really think
developing
Flacco could
into.
be.
I think Pickett could kind of be developing into that. Like I haven't read much on the details of him and his personality, but Drew Lock's kind of faded into this role a little bit as well. But kind of maybe knowing like, hey, if I want to stick around for 10 years, maybe my role is supporting starting QB, just being a career journeyman backup. That might be the route Kenny Pickett's thinking versus Joe Flacco. Man, he signs, he's ready to take someone's job. That's his. That's his
I
plan.
mean,
So
I
you're
guess you
you're gonna
don't sign Joe Flacco, and Joe Flacco doesn't sign unless he thinks he's going to be
yeah.
playing.
All right, let's move to the Travis Hunter thing. Yeah, it's funny because, we go from one Colorado drama thing to the other. Now, Hunter at least is unquestionably has the athletic ability to be drafted where he was. I don't know how much of the hype around Hunter has to do with Colorado and Deion Sanders. I just have a hard time with the hype because, I mean, we're talking about a guy who had injury issues in college for one thing, and also like we're just assuming because of all the hype that he comes with that he's going to be the first guy to really ever do something. And that's just a lot for me. Like the Jaguars trade, a true haul of picks, including their first rounder next year, which, I mean, obviously, if they repeat anything like what they did this past year, it would be a top 10 or top 5 pick. And all to move up for a guy that, like, I think the part that I really just I respect the physical tools he has. I respect the tenacity and the work ethic that it takes to even be willing, let alone able to play the sheer number of snaps that he has. But how sustainable is that? And like, I think the narrative where I officially say everybody's gone too far is, well, I heard one person defending Jacksonville's pick as, well, they didn't just trade up and use all those picks to get one player. They got 2 players. He's 2 players. He's either a shutdown corner and an occasional gadget receiver or vice versa. Sorry. First of
Making
all,
you
the
sick
fact
over
that
there.
it's sickening. But I mean, there doesn't even seem to be a consensus on which one that is. So like, some people are saying, I feel like most of the buzz I heard coming up to the draft was all pro corner, gadget receiver. Well, apparently people have been hearing from Jacksonville that they view him as all pro receiver, situational corner. So there's a conversation to be had there even about about which one of those pathways is more realistic. But before we even get into that, I mean, how do you guys feel about the whole concept of he's a two-way star? He's the Shohei Ohtani of the NFL. He's 2 players. He's not one. I mean, I consider that frankly just irresponsible hype. What do you guys think? You guys actually buy it?
So I don't know if the hype is justified in terms of that being a realistic strategy, but I think you're letting like the whole circus at Colorado and Dion being around this bother you as a prospect purely from like a fan's perspective. I think as a non-Chiefs player, I'm more excited to see him in 2025 than anybody else. This is the guy that was the #1 overall recruit coming out of high school. He just ended up at Jackson State because that was the only place that was going to let him play both ways. Had a ton of success there. And it's like, well, how's that going to translate to the D1 level? Had a ton of success there as an individual. Don't let Colorado as a team, I don't think, you don't want to let their lack of, national title contention, if you will, that level of spotlight to deter you from what we
Their sub
saw.
500 record in Dion's
Yeah.
time there.
So I think he's a fascinating story. I don't know if it'll work or not, but he's truly a blue chip talent, like on offense and defense. How sustainable that is, I don't know, but I don't think that this is like just a outlandish pick. Just as a non-Jags fan, obviously, I'm just fascinated to see what happens. I don't have a rooting interest in like seeing if he plays corner or receiver. I'd personally like to see him try both just to see if it's sustainable or not. But just purely as an athlete, I'm just really fascinated by it.
So you know what? Before Q jumps in, I want to respond to what you said there because I think it's a fair critique to say that I might have been like I had circus fatigue from Colorado, so I'm dinging him. I think that is probably fair to say. But the only thing I would say to that is it's not even so much like I find the Colorado circus relatively entertaining. I just think that it's
They're entertaining in the way Aaron Rodgers is entertaining.
well, that yeah, exactly. There is that. And then sorry. Gosh. But also Colorado's circus is what engineered this. Like you made a point that he went to Jackson State to go with Deion Sanders because that was the only place he was going to be allowed to do it. I think that is part of the narrative here, or should be part of the way you evaluate this, because it's only because of Deion Sanders in Colorado that he's even in this position. And so, it's one thing to say that maybe I've got fatigue from that, and so I'm tired of hearing about how insane he is before even playing in the NFL. But I also think it's fair to acknowledge that this is engineered by the environment he is a product of. Key, what do you got on that, or anything we've said about Travis Hunter?
To Kyle's point, I think he's going to be one of the most interesting prospects to watch this season. There's no doubt he's probably the most talented guy coming out of this draft class.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, Heisman winner, great on both sides of the ball. I think there's a reason that guys haven't done this in the past besides Dion, and that's because it's not because other guys couldn't have an impact on both sides of the ball, but the idea of playing that many snaps consistently in the NFL versus college and the Big 12, that's a whole different animal.
I was
So from the
there to
Jaguars' perspective, I think I actually do not like this at all. I think
No,
they
I
gave
didn't even
up
get to that, but I totally
I
agree.
think they gave up way too much to get him. I think their general manager, from what I've heard, is convinced that he is going to star on both sides of the ball. He even said that he could like change the trajectory of football. So I think he's viewing him with a little bit of a savior complex for a terrible franchise that is going to lose 15 games this year.
Hey, you know what? If Shohei Ohtani couldn't do it for the Angels, why do we think
Yeah.
Travis Hunter can do it
well,
for Jacksonville?
this
Yeah, I
is
mean,
this is
you
what
don't make that move for anybody but like a top tier, no doubt starting quarterback.
Well, this
Like,
is
I
what
don't
I'm
care.
kind of getting at, though, because even Dion didn't really do this his entire career. He kind of did it for part of one season. And so
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
coming at this from a fan's perspective, like for that exact reason. Jacksonville is just insane enough to like actually want to try this and be like, you know what? What if we just had him play 85% of the snaps on both sides of the ball? I don't care how reckless it is. If Travis Hunter wants to sign up for that, I'll sign up to watch it. So that's really kind of the angle I keep saying with like, people are worried about like what it's
I
going to
do
do to
agree
his
with that.
career as a player, and I'm fully like that's the player I'm locked into on week one
In
easily.
a way, I think we might see a bit of the circus following him from Colorado to Jacksonville, where, it's going to be fun to watch, but it might not be successful football that he's a part of.
You guys think it's something that is actually so like let's say that skills wise, because like there's a skills conversation even to be had there. As freakish of an athlete as he is, you're going from a level where you might play against somebody who can match your athletic ability every once in a great while, once or twice a season, to where even for as freakish as he is, now pretty much every time you play, the guys will be pretty damn close to you physical ability wise. So, like, even if he clears that hurdle and he really does have the physical tools and all the mental sides of things that are different about each side of the ball to be a well above average corner and receiver, I mean, there's a push pull argument to be had there because, the NFL is a much faster game in play, and everybody is faster. Everybody's more athletic. It's the contact is more violent, but it does tend to be slower paced in terms of like that anaerobic respiration stuff. Like there's more time between plays. There's more commercial breaks. So there's more recovery time between plays.
Less
So
no huddle.
that too. So like I don't know which one of those arguments wins out, but I think to me, like every time you hear a guy talking about how he had an adjustment period from college to the NFL, it's always the biggest thing tends to be, well, in college, even at D1 college at my Power 5 school, I really didn't face guys who were my athletic ability very often. Now I don't get to face anybody who's vastly inferior. Now everybody is. I
Yeah.
mean, everybody goes through that curve, but he's thinking he can overcome that curve on both sides of the ball while never having any time to rest or look at his iPad to try to study during the game.
See, I don't
Yeah, we
question the
haven't even
physical.
mentioned, the injury aspect. I mean, you being out there twice as often, you're twice as likely to be injured at some point for an extended amount of
Right.
time.
Well, and
If he wants
fatigue
to
And
to
sign up and the
injuries too.
Jags want to do it, like I keep saying, I think it's a mental thing. I do think he's the app had like because if you looked at him as a wide, if he was just drafted as a receiver, you wouldn't question if he could be an NFL athlete, or if he was just drafted as a corner. I think it's can he dedicate the game moves slow enough for him mentally for him to feel like he can do both. Obviously, you can argue that it's probably pretty reckless to have him on the field for that many snaps, but I think that that's probably
especially when
his
they've
biggest
invested as
hurdle.
much as they did
Yeah.
into this
See,
pick. Like you said, giving up 2 first rounders
But it's going to
is
be fun for
crazy.
us as fans, as non-Jacksonville fans. We didn't trade any assets away, so
By the way, have you guys seen a picture of or heard the Jacksonville GM? He's
mm,
34 years old. He looks like our age. It's wild. He came apparently from the Rams. He was influential in a lot of big moves in the draft that they made. Uh, I don't
Sean
know. Seemed a
McVay
little
loves
reckless.
yeah. Sean McVay loves producing more young stallions, apparently. Everybody that comes off his tree now is like what he was when he first came on. Like, wait, he's how old? And dang, like this guy's got it made. Good looking dude. Sean McVay's girlfriend, I assume maybe now wife, I don't even know, was like a model at some like and yeah, like all the guys that keep coming off his tree are cut from that same cloth. Um I don't even know where this fits into the discussion, but I just can't like I see what you're saying, Kyle, about the mental thing. But like, I was talking to my dad is still pretty heavily involved in high school football in the area, and I was talking to him about and asking him, he's telling me about a certain player or another, and I asked if he played both sides of the ball, and he's like, yeah, that's kind of and except at very small high schools, even high school football's moving away from that. That used to be like kind of an expectation in high school, like yeah, you basically had to be a star quarterback to not play defense. If you were a decent offensive lineman, you better at least be willing and happy to put your body out there on the line for the defense too. And even high schools are phasing that out.
Hell, Blue Springs
yeah,
South had a star quarterback who also played on the defense, and they went to state that year.
yeah.
Is
Blue
this
Springs
like
had a few guys
from
with it.
our days in school? When you,
Yeah,
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 that was
okay,
like
yeah, right.
2012.
So, well,
We had a
right, and
few
like so
guys that
back
did that. Yeah,
back
safety,
then
receiver,
that
skill
was
position.
Yeah. Back then, that was more the standard. But like even high school sports are moving away from two way, and now this guy thinks he's going to do it in the NFL. I just worry that we're biting off more that we can chew, and like it's not just look, if he could be an elite corner or an elite receiver, and by playing him at both ways, he ends up being just more good at both. That's still, I mean, that is crazy value. So if that's the worst case scenario, that'd be one thing. But I really see a lot of scenarios here where kind of like it's like in baseball, you get a grounder hit to you that's really not a double play ball, but you try to force the double play and you end up getting you end up getting no outs and you have two runners on base. Denny Matthews always tries to say that like you can't get two outs if you don't get one. So I feel like there's a lot of danger of that happening here, whether it's through injury, mental processing, or just fatigue, where you kind of end up with a guy you just traded your future for, who is just not really able to do anything all that well because he doesn't have the
Mhm.
time or the energy to focus on it.
Yeah, it's my prediction would be by next season he's primarily one or the other with maybe a token appearance on the opposite side of the ball
Which one
for
do you
most
think it
games,
would
but
be? Like, I think we all, well, I don't know about Kyle, but I certainly agree. I think that is exactly what's going to happen. At his youngest, we're going to see it the most, and eventually he's going to settle onto one side of the ball. That's another thing that gives me some pause on him in
As long
general,
as
though,
Dion,
is
as
that
long as
we
Dion
don't,
is the agent,
yeah,
any
yeah, no
any any
shit.
agent with common sense will start to get him, into that getting his ear there toward the end of that
Yeah.
rookie contract.
But that's another thing that gives me a little pause on him is nobody even seems to be able to agree which one he would settle into. because it's either, oh, he's just a blue chipper at both, or it's people disagreeing on which one he even is better at. So which one do we think, if we agree that that's the pathway this will take, which side of the ball you think he becomes the playing 95% of his snaps on?
So weirdly enough, think, corners probably there's less talent around the NFL at the corner position than there is receiver. With that said, when you draft them this high, how often do you see corners get taken in the top five? I think, any more
Right.
players,
Yep.
modern NFL still look for receivers to have maybe the larger impact, or maybe that's just because corners, are harder to project into the NFL a little more. And knowing Jacksonville, I do think that they're kind of going against the grain of most people's thoughts. I kind of could see them trying to work him in at receiver, try to give Trevor. I think you're probably trying to give Trevor Lawrence a weapon, is what you're looking to do, because they've committed to Trevor Lawrence. Like whether he's a QB of the future or not, 26, biggest prospect since Andrew Luck when he came in. It's really kind of been meh to a dud,
Yeah.
and now they've really
But they
committed
paid
to him
him.
financially. I know, so they've committed to him financially. So I think with that, you trade up to support your franchise quarterback that you said, hey, we believe in you. Even if you don't, you're stuck with them now. So I
Yeah, I
think the
think that's
offense.
probably right. It probably, from the GM's perspective, probably thinks it looks better if he can go out and get 1,000 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns or whatever.
Yeah, that's a lot easier
Personally,
to
I think
sell
he
than
would
a
have more
PFF grade a
impact.
corner.
I do think he would have more impact on the defensive, and I've heard seems to be better on that side, from
Plus,
what I've heard.
Jacksonville has like 30 fans. They might really start coming at that front office there and getting under their skin.
Yeah, I mean, another aspect, maybe this buoys interest even more over in Europe for good old football, because they play like 4 or 5 games over there now, don't they?
Yeah,
Chiefs
that's
play
true.
in Jacksonville this year. I might have to try to make a road trip if they get like a November
Oh
or
man.
December game.
Yeah. When is the Jacksonville game?
They announced the schedule, the actual like dates,
Oh, that's right. It comes
mid-May.
out
Yeah, yeah.
mid-May. That's
Yeah,
right.
that's
The
right.
last time they were there, I think it was like August or something like that. But every
Yeah,
time
who
they pop
scheduled
on the
that?
schedule, that could be a good winter. Yeah, it could be a good winter trip if it lands at the right time of the year.
That'd be some fantastic content for the channel too if we pulled off a road trip there. All right.
Mm.
Well, we'll leave this Chiefs pod on that note. And again, follow my new TikTok, blindbase95. Follow me on Twitter at BT Sportsman. I'm starting to do some Twitter spaces, and share the YouTube channel far and wide. We appreciate you here on the Calling It How I See It Sports Pod.